Nintendo has often been described as an intellectual property company, and on this channel before I've put out videos looking at how these IPs compare in value. One thing that needs to be considered is that while Nintendo initiated a number of especially powerful brands, many of these involve some kind of co-ownership arrangement. Therefore Pokemon, Kirby, Fire Emblem and even Xenoblade may be big earners for the company, but when you look at their stores, there is very much a Fab Four of franchises that get all the attention. The four in question, of course, are Super Mario, The Legend of Zelda, Animal Crossing, and Splatoon. And certainly in sales terms, these are the franchises which continue to provide the most benefit to Nintendo. But I think that 4 has become 5, because if you look at the Nintendo Store website, there is indication that alongside these venerable sales juggernauts, another franchise is now being pushed. Yep, Pikmin seems to be getting its own major merchandising focus. Now look, building a big Pikmin sculpture in a store dedicated to shifting merch may be a relatively small gesture, but this is part of a combined Nintendo strategy. A commenter on a previous video noted, Nintendo have continued to promote Pikmin 4 ads on major Tokyo train lines ever since release, so Pikmin 4's promotional cycle has outlasted both Mario Wonder and Tears of the Kingdom. They have even recently restarted producing new ads in the series. And I've already addressed in a previous video how Nintendo went very big with their Tiny Pioneers, with even Pikmin-themed sandwiches becoming part of the sales push. Clearly, this has had some impact, with Pikmin 4 reportedly selling 3.48 million copies worldwide, with 1.87 million in Japan as of March 2024. These numbers aren't necessarily vast by the standard of other Switch games, they're nowhere near to cracking the top 10, but the high proportion of Japanese sales is likely to draw particularly the attention of Nintendo. And also, I can see that Pikmin clearly has great merchandising potential. From erasers to magnet sets to keychains to bowls to ice makers, it's clear that Pikmin is becoming something of a merchandising juggernaut. Now, it's very difficult to know exactly how profitable that makes Pikmin, because many of these items are quite low cost, and clearly there is a very substantial marketing outlay that Nintendo are putting out in order to push the franchise. Still, the prize is clear for all to see, a 5th major franchise that they can utilise not just as a basis for games, but also films, merchandise, theme park experiences, and so on. So, let's assume that Project Pikmin works as it seems to be working, and that we are entering an era where the little creatures are the 5th pillar of Nintendo's plans. What is Pillar 6? Or 7? Where do they go next? Because you just know that Nintendo wants to keep expanding the kind of intellectual property ranges that are commanding attention. We should recall that Nintendo themselves in their company overview had identified several franchises as ones that they consider household names worldwide, including some not yet highlighted here. They say, and I quote, Nintendo Company Limited, headquartered in Kyoto, Japan, has created franchises that have become household names worldwide, including Mario trademark, Donkey Kong trademark, The Legend of Zelda trademark, Metroid trademark, Pokemon trademark, Animal Crossing trademark, Pikmin trademark, and Splatoon trademark. What's striking to me here is the omission of Kirby. Until or unless Nintendo purchases HAL Laboratory outright, I don't think they will be as bothered by pushing Kirby, which has various rights issues to contend with, even though it's clearly a hugely profitable franchise with an average of a game a year on Switch and a staggeringly deep library of merch to back it up. The same goes for other co-owned titles I mentioned. Even in the case of Xenoblade Chronicles, Nintendo's stake in Monolith Soft is a mere 96%. There is an obvious exception in the form of Pokemon, a franchise so absolutely vast and iconic that Nintendo can't help but identify their connection to it. But note that Nintendo stores don't center, or even, as far as I can tell, really feature Pokemon. Pokemon fans have their own stores and really are something quite separate. Another problem franchise for them is Donkey Kong. It's not the Barrel Blaster's lack of recent titles that's a problem so much as his positioning in relation to Mario. You see, while the Great Ape is a brilliant icon, and if he had his own separate origin it would clearly be worth building him up, I'm not sure whether Nintendo has a particular interest in separating him out from his Mario adjacent roots. Sure, he's had some amazing solo games and has a developed world that's quite separate in aesthetic and content from the Mario titles, but then you could say the same about Luigi's Mansion and WarioWare. Mario is such a huge franchise, and particularly with the movies around the corner, that Donkey Kong might find more potential in being seen as an offshoot of Mario rather than a consideration in his own right. And if we do consider Donkey Kong as a potential sixth pillar, then surely Luigi would command at least as much attention, and someone like Princess Peach might have more long-term commercial potential as a route to tap into a quite different market from any of the previous characters, specifically the young girls market, where Disney's line of princesses is already incredibly popular. After all, Nintendo don't just want different franchises, but also different franchises which expand their audience reach in different ways. People who are already invested in Mario content can be more readily upsold Donkey Kong merchandise than, say, Splatoon merchandise. So, is there really a massive potential return on investment from building up Donkey Kong as a separate going concern anyway? In any event, it's clear that for the purposes of the film at least, Donkey Kong's rights have been linked to Mario, so while pushing Donkey Kong might be good for sales of the new game and perhaps for merchandise, it doesn't help offer Nintendo the chance to build a new property that they can sell on. It's just helping build the value of one they already have. Therefore, let's look outside spin-offs and try to find completely discrete franchises which could have outsized potential. We're looking for marquee characters who could headline great merchandising lines. They don't necessarily need to be huge at present, but there needs to be some evidence of ongoing interest from Nintendo. Sorry, Chibi-Robo. There also needs to be 100% ownership stake from Nintendo themselves. No shared arrangement. Sorry again to Chibi-Robo. Now, it's quite possible that the next franchise with this potential is still to be announced. After all, Nintendo is committed to developing new IP, and given how quickly Splatoon blasted onto the stage, I can absolutely see a new IP making it big for Nintendo in the coming generation. Still, as it stands, I think there are only 3 current Nintendo franchises that fit the bill, but all of these have big problems. The most obvious perhaps is Metroid, which of course already made Nintendo's list of iconic first-party titles. Metroid has already been used as the release day game for the Switch revision, the Switch OLED, which is a real position of trust, and Nintendo has invested heavily in the franchise with not just Metroid Dread, but also Metroid Prime 4 being a major game of some considerable scale. Metroid has many benefits for Nintendo if they can push the franchise. It appeals to a more hardcore base of fans, which might allow Nintendo to push into the territory of Sony and Microsoft, and it has a deeply respected science fiction story. It also has a female lead, which is potentially of high value to them as they're trying to push out of a male-dominated gaming space and appeal to girls and women. They've also gone a long way down this route. For example, they've been trying to push Peach and Zelda with their own games this year. Isabelle has become almost the definitive icon for Animal Crossing, despite the fact that she only appeared in the last 2 games, plus Splatoon is full of iconic female characters such as Callie, Marie, Pearl, Marina, Shiver and Fry. Samus Aran is sufficiently different from any of these that she would stand alone. However, Metroid has real flaws. For one thing, Metroid has simply never captivated Japanese players to the same extent as other franchises. This was addressed by Metroid's creator, Yoshio Sakamoto, in a 2010 interview around the release of Metroid Other M. IGN said, "You admitted during your GDC panel that Metroid series isn't nearly as popular in Japan as it is in the US, but do you understand why that's the case?" Sakamoto responded, "In Japan, the people who are into Metroid tend to be hardcore game fans. It's not a series that's necessarily found acceptance in Japan outside of that niche. You can also say that it's the same as how science fiction is embraced in the United States compared to Japan. Science fiction seems to be a niche genre in Japan as a whole, whereas it seems to have found more mainstream success in the US. I find it interesting that in the land which popularized the idea of massive great big mechs, sci-fi could be niche, but it does seem to have been true. But of course, times change. Sci-fi used to be a niche and even slightly scorned genre in the West, even after massive films like Star Wars gradually started to change the narrative. Metroid Dread did break sales records in Japan with 86,000 physical units sold in the first week. Still, Metroid doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense as a merchandising focus. I don't know that many parents are going to be buying their little ones Ridley or Mother Brain dolls, or even Samus plushies to cuddle up to when there's Mario, Isabelle, Link and Zelda just around the corner. The fact that Samus's iconic look has her face hidden behind a visor, and the fact that the universe Samus inhabits is dark and unforgiving, all makes it, I think, a harder sell to put her at the front of a merchandising lineup. And look, good on Nintendo for not trying to water down what Metroid is with some kind of chibi mascot characters. Still, I think if Nintendo continue to double down on Metroid's strengths, great gameplay, amazing storytelling, and iconic characters, they may well find that it has potential in other merchandising fields. Even if people don't buy plushies, they may well buy t-shirts and action figures and models, and it surely can't have escaped Nintendo's notice that the franchise has incredible potential as a film or television series. I really don't think they spent so much effort bringing Metroid back, building it up over the past several years, purely because they think it will be nice for the fans, or even because the sales of prior games particularly justify it. I think, as with Pikmin, they have a vision that their investment will lead somewhere, and I'm going to be very intrigued to see how Nintendo position Metroid with the release of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, but currently I'm not sure they see it as having a huge merchandising future, at least in the medium term. Still, while Metroid is the franchise that is by far the closest to making the big time, I think there are other franchises with real potential. Now the second I've got here is ARMS. Now this might seem like a really odd choice. ARMS did well, but not phenomenally for the Switch in 2017. It has yet to receive a sequel and largely seems to have disappeared from view, but with 2.72 million units sold as of the end of 2022, ARMS isn't all that far from the kind of numbers Pikmin and Metroid are pulling. And that's with its first game and its biggest marketing push coming at a time when the install base of the Nintendo Switch was, relatively speaking, derisory. At the time of its launch in Japan, it compared very favourably to other fighting franchises in terms of sales. It's created by one of Nintendo's youngest teams, led by Kosuke Yabuki, who is still in his early 40s, and as people in that team become more senior in the company, it's possible to imagine their fondness for the franchise leading them to look for more opportunities to push it. The same kind of gentle guardianship that Shigeru Miyamoto offered to Pikmin all those years, which does seem to have helped it overcome obscurity many, many times. Moreover, aesthetically, it's impossible to deny that ARMS has huge potential with bright, appealing characters as well as diverse ones, which will help it push into new markets and potentially into new countries. I think it does have flaws though. For one thing, and it might sound daft, but I do think it was a major mistake by Nintendo to give it the name ARMS. I'm sorry to say, but however big the franchise gets, it's always going to be difficult to top search results when you're competing with the global military-industrial complex for brand recognition. Secondly, the nature of the ARMS characters is actually quite problematic for merchandising. Kirby is the ideal shape for merchandising, one big blob. Robust, no angles or rough edges or bits that will break or twist. The ARMS characters are the opposite, spindly by intent. I noticed that even now on the Japanese Nintendo YouTube, there's a video up about people playing ARMS, so I don't think Nintendo has given up on the property, and I certainly don't think they have put it into Super Smash Bros. If there wasn't a belief in it. But it feels like it's in a similar position to that which Pikmin was in the middle of the early 2000s. Some potential, but a long way off realising that potential in any serious way. Before looking at the last franchise, I should give a couple of honourable mentions. These are the Mii universe and Ring Fit Adventure. Now Nintendo seems to be backtracking from Mii's, and even if they make a dramatic return with Tomodachi Life, the whole concept of a Mii is very resistant to having a single iconic figure. Whose Mii would it be? I suppose they could potentially go down the Funko Pop style route, but I think they're way off doing this yet. As for Ring Fit Adventure, I think it featuring in Alamo demonstrates yet again that they do want to invest in it, and I think it's very obvious how the Ring Fit brand would tap into a completely fresh merchandising avenue, particularly if they want to explore the fitness route even further. Still, the last franchise that I think has real potential for them is, of course, Star Fox. But here we have even more problems. Firstly, it's another franchise where international sales probably drove its success more than domestic sales. Secondly, it's another sci-fi world, although it does have at least a lot more mascot characters who are likely to have broad appeal. The merchandising potential of Fox and company is obvious. Still, Star Fox does have a very developed world and a deep bench of characters, so while I think its gaming future is somewhat in doubt still, it occurs to me also that there is breakout potential through a different type of media, such as a television serial or a movie. We know that with Pikmin, Shigeru Miyamoto has always been very keen to push Fox McCloud and company. Now, in some respects, I do worry whether Star Fox's core concept all feels a little dated. The hard-bitten hotshot space action hero was big in the middle 20th century. Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, Dan Dare, Han Solo and Captain Kirk all being variously popular versions of the genre. But just as the Western has declined, so too have these kinds of space operas, replaced by more nuanced science fiction worlds. Of course, times change and tastes continue to change, and so maybe Star Fox may have a better shot in the future, but I still think that day is a relatively long way off. Still, there's no reason to imagine that Nintendo won't try to push Star Fox in smaller ways. The first big step would obviously be just a new title, but even cameos in the likes of Mario Kart and perhaps a bigger showcase in a future Smash would be a major step forward. And of course, whenever I talk Star Fox, I reliably get pulled up for not mentioning the potential of a Star Fox Adventures remake, and while I don't think a GameCube remake would catapult Fox into the big time straight off, it might be a good way to remind players of his existence. Ultimately, of course, Nintendo's big next franchise may not even be one we know about yet. Like Splatoon in 2014, when it had yet to be released and was merely an enigmatic smile on the lips of Nintendo developers, the hugest potential could be with franchises yet to be revealed and perhaps still in deep development. For more on what kinds of titles might be in development, check out this video on screen or one of the other cool ones that are up there as well. Thank you so much for watching, thanks to my Patreon supporters particularly as ever, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.